The hall was enormous, and it made humans feel like insects. Ambassador Idris Okonkwo stood at the base of the central podium, inside the Galactic Concord Hall, a structure carved from living crystal that stretched so far above him that the ceiling disappeared into soft white light. He had been here many times before, but the sheer size of the place never stopped pressing down on him like a weight he could not name. 432 species held seats in this hall, and every single one of them was older than humanity. Some had traveled between stars before humans had learned to make fire, and others had built empires while Earth was still a ball of cooling rock spinning quietly in the dark. Humanity had been granted provisional membership only 11 years ago, and in those 11 years, Okonkwo had learned one truth above all others. The galaxy did not respect the young. He adjusted the collar of his formal suit and looked up at the tiers of seats that rose in wide arcs around the chamber. Thousands of alien faces looked back at him, and not one of them was smiling in kindness. Some were curious, some were bored, and many were already whispering among themselves in languages his translator could barely catch. He took a slow breath, and he began to speak. "Honored members of the Galactic Concord," he said, his voice amplified by the hall's ancient systems, so that every being in the chamber could hear him clearly. "I come before you today to request formal trade route protections for human vessels operating in the rim sectors." He paused and let the words settle. "In the last 8 months, human cargo ships have been attacked 47 times in Concord-regulated space. These attacks have killed over 4,000 of our civilians, including children, medical workers, and engineers traveling to assist joint development projects. We have gathered evidence, and I must share it with you now." He activated the datapad in his hand, and a massive holographic display appeared above the podium, showing ship logs, distress signals, and the broken wreckage of human freighters drifting in the void. "The raiders are Tural warships," Okonkwo continued, "and their navigation systems contain encrypted command codes that trace directly to the Valkyrie Dominion. These were not random attacks by desperate pirates. They were coordinated military strikes authorized by a member species of this very council." The hall shifted. A ripple of murmurs passed through the tiers like wind through tall grass, and Okonkwo watched the reaction carefully. He saw surprise on some faces, anger on a few, but on far too many he saw nothing at all. Just the blank calm of beings who had already decided they did not care. Then Counselor Draven Joel stood up. Joel was enormous, even by the standards of the Valkyrie, a reptilian species with dark green scales and eyes like polished amber. He rose from his seat in the upper tier with the slow confidence of someone who had never been challenged in his life, and the chamber grew quiet immediately. When the Valkyrie spoke, the galaxy listened. "Ambassador Okonkwo," Joel said, and his deep voice rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. "Your species has been part of this Concord for barely a single rotation of your own star. You come to us with accusations against a civilization that has maintained galactic peace for 9,000 years, and you expect us to take you seriously?" He let out a sound that Okonkwo's translator rendered as a laugh, low and rumbling and full of contempt. "Humanity is a mewling species, still wet from its cradle world," Joel declared, spreading his massive arms wide, as if addressing the entire galaxy. "And if your people cannot protect their own cargo ships in open space, then perhaps you do not deserve trade routes at all. The strong do not beg the Council for protection. The strong protect themselves." Laughter broke out across the chamber. It started with the Valkyrie delegation, a dozen of them stomping their heavy feet against the crystal floor in their species' version of applause. The Drenathi clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Orvani flashed bright patterns of yellow light across their translucent bodies, and even species that Okonkwo had considered neutral joined in with their own sounds of mockery. The noise filled the vast hall and echoed off every surface until it surrounded him completely. Okonkwo stood still and let it wash over him. He did not flinch, and he did not look away. He had been trained for this moment, not in any classroom, but in the quiet hours of 100 diplomatic humiliations that no one back on Earth would ever know about. He knew what the galaxy thought of his species: small, fragile, short-lived, irrelevant, and he had carried that knowledge like a stone in his chest for years. When the laughter finally faded, he spoke again. I request a formal vote on economic sanctions against the Velkari Dominion for their sponsorship of these attacks. The vote was held within the hour, and it failed, 389 to 43. Not even close, not even a fight. Okonkwo gathered his datapad and walked out of the chamber with his delegation behind him. 6 humans, moving through a sea of alien bodies, none of them speaking, all of them burning. Outside the hall, in the wide corridor that connected the Concord chambers to the docking ring, a figure was waiting for him. It was Legate Sithanoon of the Ulari Communion, an insectoid being with a segmented body and large compound eyes that reflected the corridor lights in 1,000 tiny points. "Ambassador," Sithanoon said in her soft clicking voice, falling into step beside him, "I voted in your favor. I want you to know that." 43 out of 432, Okonkwo replied quietly. "But I appreciate it, Legate." "You should appreciate something else," she said, and she stopped walking, which made him stop too. She looked at him with those vast, multifaceted eyes, and he saw something in them that he had never seen from an alien before. Genuine concern. "They are not merely laughing at you, Ambassador. They are measuring you. What your species does next will determine whether humanity survives the century. Do you understand what I am telling you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded. "I understand," he said. He returned to the UES Prometheus, Earth's only warship at the station, and Captain Rena Vasquez met him at the airlock. She was a compact woman with dark eyes and close-cropped hair, and she had the kind of face that never showed surprise because she had already imagined every possible disaster long before it happened. "How bad?" she asked. "As bad as it gets," Okonkwo answered, and he moved past her to the communications room without another word. He sat down at the encrypted terminal and composed a message. Just 3 lines, transmitted on Earth's most secure channel to a facility buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps. The message read, "Cradle Protocol, unanimous denial, advise." 6,000 light-years away, in a room that did not officially exist, 12 people sat around a steel table and read those words on a screen. The Secretary-General of the United Nations read them aloud, and the room was silent. At the far end of the table, a woman named Director Yuna Tanaka of the Office of Exostrategic Affairs opened a black folder. The label on the front read Prometheus Unbound in red letters, and she had been carrying it with her every single day for the past 3 years, waiting for this exact moment. She looked up at the 11 other faces in the room, and she said, "Then we do it our way." No one in the galaxy heard her say it, but they would all feel it soon enough. 72 hours had passed since the vote, and the galaxy had already forgotten about it. That was the thing about being small. Nobody watched you for long. The Concord moved on to other business, other disputes between older and more important species, and humanity's humiliation became just another footnote in the endless record of council proceedings. Draven Jal had returned to his private quarters aboard Aethera Prime and was already entertaining diplomats from a dozen species, celebrating what he considered a flawless display of dominance. But beneath the surface of that calm, something was moving. On Earth, Director Yuna Tanaka had not slept in 2 days. She stood in the underground command center beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by screens and officers, and the low hum of machines that most of the world did not know existed. She was a small woman with sharp features and gray streaks in her black hair, and she had spent the last 10 years of her life preparing for a moment that everyone else had prayed would never come. Activate all dormant assets across sectors 7 through 18, she said, and her voice was steady, even though her hands were not. Authorization code, Tanaka Prometheus 997. Across 12 star systems, things began to wake up. Hidden sensor arrays, disguised as dead satellites, powered on for the first time in years. Supply caches, buried inside asteroids, unlocked their seals. Communication relays that had been sitting silent in the dark corners of space began to hum with encrypted signals. Earth had been building this network in secret for over a decade, piece by piece, mission by mission, always under the cover of routine exploration and mining operations. Nobody had noticed, because nobody had been looking. That was the part that made Tanaka feel something between pride and sorrow. Humanity had done all of this, not because they wanted to, but because they had understood from the very first day of contact that the galaxy would never see them as equals. The older species looked at humans the way a grown person might look at a child, pretending to be important. And no amount of diplomacy or good behavior was ever going to change that. So Earth had prepared in the shadows, and now the shadows were about to open. Meanwhile, at Aethera Prime, Ambassador Okonkwo was doing his part. He had filed a formal request for a procedural review of the vote, citing 17 different subsections of Concord law that required additional documentation. It was boring and technical, and exactly the kind of thing that made alien bureaucrats sigh and wave their appendages in frustration. And that was the entire point. Every hour he kept the council focused on paperwork was another hour that Tanaka and her people could work. "You are stalling," Legate Sitha Noon told him during a quiet meeting in a side corridor, her compound eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being read page by page. "I am exercising my legal rights under Concord statute," Okonkwo replied. "You are stalling," she repeated, "and you are very good at it. But I wonder, Ambassador, what are you stalling for?" He did not answer that question, and she did not push, but he could see in the way she held her segmented body that she already suspected something. The Ulari were a collective intelligence, and they understood patience better than almost anyone in the galaxy. They also understood preparation. Far from Aethera Prime, in the swirling purple clouds of the Kefani Nebula, Lieutenant Commander Matteo Ferreira was crawling through a ventilation shaft aboard an alien warship, and he was trying very hard not to breathe too loudly. They called him Ghost, and he had earned the name over 15 years of operations that officially did not exist. He was lean and quiet, and had the kind of eyes that noticed everything and gave away nothing. Right now, those eyes were fixed on a data terminal at the end of the shaft, glowing faintly in the dark. His team, 4 operators, the best Earth had, were positioned throughout the Tyrol flagship, each one moving silently toward a different objective. Their mission was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Find the proof, copy the proof, and get out alive. The Tyrol warlord Garek was somewhere on this ship, surrounded by his personal guard, commanding a fleet of 60 raider vessels. He was a massive creature with tusks and armor-plated skin, and he answered directly to Draven Joel, a fact that Earth needed to prove beyond any doubt. Ghost reached the terminal and connected a small device to its port. Data began to flow, and what he saw made his stomach tighten. It was not just command codes, it was everything. Mission orders, signed with Velkari authority seals, payment records, target lists, and detailed intelligence on human shipping routes, that could only have come from someone inside the Concord's own trade commission. The Velkari had not just sponsored the pirate raids, they had planned them down to the last detail, and they had used the Concord's own systems to do it. Ghost transmitted a compressed burst to his handler. Package confirmed. Full chain of evidence secured. Request extraction window. The reply came back in seconds. Hold position. Extraction in 41 hours. New orders incoming. He read the new orders twice, and then he read them a third time, because he could not believe what they said. This was not an intelligence mission anymore. This was the first move in something much bigger. Back on the Prometheus, Captain Rena Vasquez sat alone in her quarters and stared at the sealed orders on her screen. She had opened them with her personal authorization code, and now the words glowed in front of her in cold white light. Operation Prometheus Unbound. She read every line, every detail, every contingency, and when she was finished, she sat in silence for a very long time. The plan was precise and coordinated and utterly audacious, and it would either save humanity or condemn it. The door chimed, and Okonkwo entered. He looked at her face and immediately knew something had changed. "What are they planning?" he asked. Vasquez looked at him, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw something in her eyes that was not calm analysis or military discipline. It was fire. "What you could not do with words, Ambassador," she said. "We are going to make them listen." He wanted to ask more, but she shook her head. He was a diplomat, and there were things he could not know yet, not because she did not trust him, but because when the moment came, his genuine surprise would need to be real. The galaxy could smell a performance, but it could not fake the look on a man's face when his world changed. That night, as the station's artificial lights dimmed to simulate evening, every human embassy across the galaxy sealed its doors at the same moment. The coordination was perfect. 23 embassies on 23 different worlds, all going dark within the same 60-second window. Human merchant vessels began changing course, pulling away from alien ports and heading back toward Earth-controlled space in long, quiet lines. Trade agreements were paused, communications were reduced to emergency channels only, and the warm, familiar presence of human activity in the galaxy simply vanished like breath on cold glass. The other species noticed, eventually. The Dranathi trade minister sent an inquiry that went unanswered. The Uvani cultural attaché found the human embassy on their world locked and lightless. Even the minor species who barely interacted with humanity felt the absence the way a room feels different when someone has left it without saying goodbye. But nobody was worried. Not really. "They are retreating," the Velkari analysts reported to Draven Joel. "Pulling back to their home territory, it appears the council vote has broken their confidence." Joel received this news with satisfaction, and poured himself another drink of the dark amber liquid he favored. "Of course they are retreating," he said to his advisors. "They are children, and children run home when the world frightens them. By the next cycle they will come back to the council with softer words and lower heads, and we will remind them once again where they stand." His advisors agreed, because they always agreed, and because the idea that humanity might be doing anything other than running away was simply too absurd to consider. 6,000 light-years from that comfortable room, Director Yuna Tanaka checked her watch and looked at the countdown timer on the wall of her command center. It read 41 hours and was dropping by the second. "All teams report status," she said into the encrypted channel. One by one, voices came back from across the stars, quiet, steady, and ready. The galaxy thought Earth was running away, and that was exactly what Earth needed them to think, because in 41 hours, the silence would end, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The clock hit 0 at midnight, Galactic Standard Time, and humanity stopped being quiet. It began with the lights going out, not on Earth, and not on any human ship, but inside the Velkari Dominion's own communication network. Deep within the shared relay systems that connected every species in the Concord, a piece of code that had been sleeping for 3 years woke up and did exactly what it had been designed to do. It did not destroy anything, and it did not shut down the network. What it did was far more elegant and far more terrifying. It isolated every single Valkyrie encrypted channel from the rest of the relay grid. In one instant, the most powerful species in the galaxy lost the ability to talk to its own vassal fleets, its own outposts, and its own allies. For the first time in 9,000 years, the Valkyrie were deaf. The blackout would last exactly 6 hours. That was all Earth needed. Director Tanaka stood in her command center and watched the feeds come in from across the stars. Every screen on the wall showed a different operation unfolding in real time, each one synchronized to the second, each one manned by people who had trained for years without knowing if this night would ever come. Phase 1 confirmed, an officer reported. Valkyrie comms are isolated. They are blind for the next 5 hours and 58 minutes. Tanaka nodded. Begin Phase 2. In the Cathani Nebula, Ghost Ferreira moved. He had been holding position aboard the Tyrol flagship for nearly 2 days, eating nothing, sleeping in shifts of 20 minutes, and keeping his breathing shallow enough to avoid the ship's internal sensors. Now the waiting was over, and he felt the familiar cold focus settle into his bones like ice water. His team struck from 4 directions at once. They did not use guns, because guns made noise, and noise attracted attention. Instead, they used close-quarters tools, neural disruptors, stun charges, and hands that had been trained to find the exact points on a Tyrol body where pressure meant unconsciousness. The bridge crew went down in 11 seconds, the engineering section in 14. The personal guard outside Garek's quarters lasted a full 30 seconds, which Ghost considered impressive. Garek himself was the last. The Tyrol warlord was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with tusks that could punch through steel plating. And when Ghost entered his quarters, the alien was already on his feet, with a weapon in each hand. "Human," Garek snarled, and the translator rendered the word with a layer of disgust so thick it was almost physical. He activated the neural disruptor at maximum range, and the warlord's eyes went wide for 1 fraction of a second, before his legs gave out, and he crashed to the floor like a falling building. The entire operation, from first breach to final capture, took 40 minutes. "Package secured," Ghost transmitted. "Target is alive. All databanks are being copied now." The databanks contained everything. Every order, every payment, every authorization code, every message between Garek and Draven Zol. It was the complete record of a conspiracy that had killed 4,000 human beings. And Ghost made sure every single byte was captured before he transmitted it on an open channel to every species in the Galactic Concord simultaneously. The proof of the Valkyrie's crimes was now public, undeniable, and impossible to erase. Phase 2 was complete. While Ghost's team was extracting from the nebula with an unconscious warlord in their cargo hold, Phase 3 was already underway. Across the rim sectors, in asteroid fields and dead zones, and forgotten corners of space where nobody ever looked twice, 48 objects that had been classified as mining equipment began to change shape. They unfolded like metal flowers blooming in the dark, panels rotating, antennas extending, weapon systems powering up for the first time. They were autonomous defense platforms, each one armed with kinetic impactors capable of punching through heavy armor, and electromagnetic pulse arrays that could disable an entire fleet's electronics in a single burst. Earth had built them over 10 years, one at a time, shipping the components in pieces disguised as industrial supplies. Each platform had been assembled in secret by small teams who were told only what they needed to know, and each one had sat dormant and invisible until this exact moment. Now they activated simultaneously, and the rim sectors, the same trade routes where human ships had been hunted and destroyed, became the most heavily defended corridors in the galaxy overnight. Every pirate lane, every ambush point, every hiding spot that the Tyrrell had used was now covered by targeting systems that never blinked and never slept. Phase 3 was complete. At Aethira Prime, Captain Rena Vasquez executed Phase 4 with the kind of calm precision that made her crew believe she had ice in her veins instead of blood. The UES Prometheus detached from its docking berth and moved to the center of the station's main approach corridor. It was not retreating, and it was not hiding. It was positioning itself directly between the station and open space, its weapons powered, its shields raised, and its transponder broadcasting on every frequency. Vasquez opened an all-channel broadcast, and her voice reached every ship and every being on the station. "This is Captain Rena Vasquez of the United Earthship Prometheus," she said. "Effective immediately, we are enforcing a protective cordon around all human assets at this station. Any hostile action against human personnel or property will be met with reciprocal force. We do not bluff." The station's security chief, a Drenathi officer with 6 arms and a temper to match, immediately demanded she stand down. Vasquez did not even acknowledge the message. The Prometheus held its position like a wall, and nobody on that station was willing to test whether the humans meant what they said. Phase 4 was complete, and then came Phase 5, the part that would be remembered longest. Ambassador Idris Okonkwo walked into the Galactic Concord Hall for the last time. The chamber was in chaos. Delegates were shouting, screens were displaying the captured Velkari command codes, and representatives from dozens of species were demanding explanations that nobody could give. The Velkari delegation sat in their seats like statues, their communications still dead, their faces unreadable. Okonkwo walked to the central podium and placed a single datapad on its surface. He did not rush, and he did not raise his voice. The hall quieted as he approached, not because they respected him, but because they sensed that something fundamental was about to change. He looked up at the tiers of faces, 432 species, the same ones who had laughed at him 72 hours ago, and he began to read. "To all members of the Galactic Concord," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of that vast chamber. "The United Nations of Earth hereby formally withdraws from every treaty, trade agreement, mutual defense pact, and cooperative accord signed between humanity and this body over the past 11 years. Every single one, without exception." The silence in the chamber was so complete that Okonkwo could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. "Earth entered this council in good faith," he continued. "We came with open hands and honest words. We asked only to trade, to learn, and to live among you as equals. That faith has been answered with contempt, conspiracy, and the murder of our people. And when we brought you evidence of these crimes, you answered with laughter." He paused and looked directly at the section where Draven Joel sat. The massive reptilian counselor stared back at him with amber eyes that showed nothing. "Effective immediately, all treaties between Earth and the Galactic Concord are dissolved," Okonkwo said. "We will defend ourselves, we will protect our people, and we will remember who laughed." He stepped back from the podium, and at that exact moment, every screen in the chamber lit up with the captured data from Garek's flagship. Draven Joel's personal authorization codes on every pirate raid, every attack order, every payment to the Tyrrell. The evidence filled the hall in glowing columns of light, and 431 species turned to look at the Velkari delegation. Joel began to rise from his seat, his mouth opening to speak, but there was nothing he could say that would erase what was now displayed on every screen in the galaxy. He sat back down. Okonkwo turned and walked out of the chamber. His delegation followed him in silence. 6 humans moving through a room full of beings who were no longer laughing, who were, for the first time, watching humanity with something that looked very much like fear. Behind them, in the upper tier, Legate Scythe Noon of the Olari Communion sat perfectly still and watched the humans leave. Her compound eyes tracked every step, and when the doors closed behind them, she transmitted a single message to her homeworld, on a private channel. The humans did not retreat, she said. They evolved. The galaxy woke up to a different universe, and it did not know what to do. In the 48 hours that followed Operation Prometheus Unbound, the political landscape that had been stable for thousands of years began to crack like ice under pressure. What had seemed permanent and unshakable only days before now looked fragile, and every species in the Concord was scrambling to figure out where it stood in a galaxy that no longer had the same rules. The Valkyrie Dominion was hit the hardest. Draven Jol's faction had been built on the assumption that no one would ever challenge them, not seriously, not effectively, and certainly not a species that had only been part of the galactic community for 11 years. But the evidence from Garek's databanks had been transmitted to every corner of civilized space, and there was no way to deny it, no way to spin it, and no way to make it disappear. The command codes bore Joel's personal seal. The payment records traced back to accounts he controlled. The target lists had been compiled using intelligence that only someone with his level of access could have obtained. The case was so complete and so damning that even his own allies could not pretend they had not seen it. Within hours, rival clans within the Valkyrie Dominion began issuing public statements, distancing themselves from Joel's faction. The Kethvar clan, the second most powerful group in the Dominion, called for an immediate internal investigation. The Dral Shen clan went further and demanded Joel's arrest, and the military commanders who had once followed his orders without question began to look at each other and wonder who would be the first to refuse the next one. The 6-hour communications blackout had made everything worse. During those critical hours, when Joel could not reach his vassal fleets, the Tural had been left leaderless and confused. With Garek captured and the command structure decapitated, the 60 raider vessels in the Cathani Nebula had scattered in different directions, each captain making independent decisions based on panic rather than strategy. By the time Valkyrie communications were restored, the Tural fleet was fractured beyond repair. The great Valkyrie Dominion, which had dominated galactic politics for 9,000 years, was tearing itself apart from the inside, and humanity had done it in a single night. At Aethera Prime, Ambassador Okonkwo found himself in a position he had never experienced before. People were coming to him. 12 species that had voted against Earth's original petition now sent private messages requesting bilateral talks. The Drenethi trade minister, who had clicked his mandibles in laughter just days ago, arrived at the human delegation's quarters with a formal apology and a proposal for a direct trade agreement that bypassed the Concord entirely. The Urvani cultural attaché brought gifts of bioluminescent art and spoke carefully about the possibility of scientific cooperation. The section, they were not doing this because they felt guilty. Guilt was a luxury that galactic politics did not allow. They were doing it because they were afraid, and because they were impressed, and because a species that could build 48 weapons platforms in secret, infiltrate an enemy flagship, disable a galactic communications network, and expose a conspiracy all in one coordinated strike, was not a species that anyone wanted as an enemy. Okonkwo received each delegation with the same calm courtesy he had always shown, and he made no promises. Earth had burned its treaties for a reason, and rebuilding trust would take more than polite words and pretty gifts. The most significant development came from the Ualari Communion. Legate Scytha Noon arrived at the human quarters not with a private message, but with a formal offer. A full military and economic alliance between the Communion and Earth, publicly declared and binding under Ulari law. My people have watched the Valkyrie dominate this galaxy for 8,000 years, Scytha Noon told Okonkwo, her clicking voice softer than usual. We have waited for someone to challenge that dominance, someone with the courage and the cleverness to do what we could not. We did not expect it to be the youngest species in the chamber, but perhaps that is exactly why it had to be you. You had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Okonkwo accepted the offer, and for the first time since the council vote, he allowed himself something that might have been a smile. But the crisis was not over. Draven Joel was wounded, politically and personally, and a wounded Velkari was a dangerous thing. He knew that his position within the Dominion was collapsing, that his rivals were circling, and that the humans had made him look like a fool in front of the entire galaxy. He had one chance left to salvage his authority, and he intended to take it. He invoked the right of diminishment. It was an ancient Concord law, older than most of the species that currently held seats. It allowed the council to strip a provisional member of its sovereignty entirely, reducing it to a protectorate with no rights, no vote, and no independence. It had been used only twice in galactic history, both times against species that no longer existed. The vote was called, and for a few tense hours, it seemed like it might actually pass. The Velkari still had allies, and there were species who feared what humanity had just demonstrated more than they respected it. Species who thought that putting humans back in a cage was safer than letting them run free. But the numbers did not hold. Species that had once voted with the Velkari without question now hesitated. Some abstained, some switched sides, and when the final count came in, the motion failed, 218 to 214. 4 votes. That was the margin. 4 votes separated humanity from extinction as a sovereign species, and every human who heard the result understood exactly how close they had come. Joel received the news in silence, and something changed behind his amber eyes. The political game was lost, and he knew it. His faction was crumbling. His allies were abandoning him, and the right of diminishment, his last legal weapon, had been blunted. So he reached for an illegal one. Without authorization from the Velkari High Council, without consultation with his own military commanders, and in direct violation of 6 different Concord regulations, Joel ordered a battle group of 30 warships to jump to the human colony on Kepler 14b and establish a full military blockade. It was a trap and everyone knew it. If the humans fired first, Joel could claim self-defense and rally the galaxy against them. If the humans did nothing, the blockade would strangle their colony and prove that Earth's show of strength had been nothing more than a show. The colony on Kepler 414b held 12,000 people, families, scientists, farmers, children who had been born under an alien sun and had never seen Earth. They had minimal defenses, a small garrison, and no warships within 3 days' travel. When the Velkari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took up positions around the planet, the colony's governor sent a distress signal on every channel she could reach. Her voice was shaking, but clear. "This is Governor Amara Singh of Kepler 442b. We are a civilian settlement. 30 warships have just surrounded our planet. We need help." The message reached Director Tanaka on Earth within minutes. She forwarded it to Captain Vasquez aboard the Prometheus at Aethera Prime, and then she sat down at her desk and thought about what she was about to do. She picked up the secure channel and called Okonkwo. "Idris," she said, and he could hear something in her voice that he had never heard before. Not doubt, but the weight of what came next. If this goes wrong, history will say we were reckless. If it goes right, history will say we were brave. Either way, we did not kneel. "We never do," Okonkwo replied, and the channel went silent. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Vasquez read the distress signal and looked at the tactical display. 30 Velkari warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than her vessel, surrounding a planet full of civilians with no one to protect them. She turned to her crew, Men and women who had signed up to defend humanity among the stars, knowing the odds and knowing the cost. And she said, "Set course for Kepler 442b, best possible speed." A young officer at the navigation console looked up. "Captain, what are our orders when we arrive?" Vasquez looked at the star map, at the tiny blue dot that represented 12,000 human lives, and at the red markers that represented 30 warships built by a civilization that had been making war since before Earth had language. "We are going to stand between them and our people," she said. "That is what we do." The Prometheus turned and jumped, and the stars blurred into lines of white light around it. When the ship dropped out of FTL at Kepler 442b, the Valkyrie fleet filled the tactical display like a wall of iron and fire. 30 warships, dark and angular, and bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Vasquez opened a channel, and her voice went out to every ship in that fleet and every ear listening across the galaxy. She said one word that no Valkyrie had heard from a younger species in 10,000 years. The standoff at Kepler 442b began with a single word, and then it stretched into hours, long, silent, unbearable hours, where the distance between war and peace was measured in the trembling of fingers above firing controls. Captain Rena Vasquez sat in her command chair aboard the Prometheus and watched the tactical display with eyes that did not blink. 30 red markers surrounded the planet in a tight formation, each one representing a Valkyrie warship that outgunned her vessel by a factor she did not care to calculate. One blue marker sat in the center of that formation, like a single stone in a river of fire. That blue marker was her ship, her crew, her responsibility. "Valkyrie fleet, this is Captain Vasquez of the UES Prometheus," she repeated for the 4th time. "You are blockading a civilian human settlement in violation of Concord law. You will withdraw your forces, or you will face consequences. This is not a negotiation." The Valkyrie fleet commander was a career officer named Admiral Torvan, and he was not like Draven Joel. Torvan had served the Dominion for 200 years, and he had earned his rank through skill and discipline rather than politics. He was not cruel, and he was not foolish, and right now he was staring at his own tactical display with a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. Uncertainty. He had received his orders directly from Joel. Blockade the colony, provoke the humans into firing first, and then destroy them with overwhelming force. It was a clean and simple plan, the kind that looked elegant on paper, and collapsed into blood and chaos the moment real beings had to carry it out. But the human ship was not behaving the way Torvan had expected. He had assumed it would hold position at a safe distance, make threats over the communications channel, and eventually withdraw when it became clear that a single vessel could not challenge 30 warships. That was what any rational species would do. Calculate the odds, accept the mathematics of defeat, and retreat to fight another day. Instead, the Prometheus had moved forward. Not aggressively, not recklessly, but with a slow and steady advance that put it directly between the Valkyrie fleet and the planet. It was placing itself in the line of fire on purpose, and its weapons were armed, and its shields were up, and its captain was still talking on an open channel, as if she had 30 ships of her own behind her, instead of nothing but empty space. Torvan understood something in that moment that many beings in the galaxy had failed to grasp. The humans were not bluffing, and they were not performing. They were genuinely prepared to die. Hour after hour, the standoff continued. The Valkyrie warships held their positions, and the Prometheus held its ground, and the 12,000 people on the planet below tried to go about their lives while the sky above them was filled with weapons that could end everything in seconds. On Earth, Director Tanaka monitored every signal, every sensor reading, every fluctuation in the energy output of the Valkyrie ships. She had teams working around the clock, analyzing patterns, predicting movements, and preparing contingency plans for scenarios that ranged from bad to catastrophic. But she also had one more card to play, the last gift from Ghost Ferreira's intelligence hall. Buried deep in the data from Ga-Rex's flagship, beneath the command codes and the payment records and the target lists, Ghost's analysts had found something that was not related to the pirate raids at all. It was a set of financial records showing that Draven Jal had secretly diverted enormous amounts of resources from other Valkyrie clans, funds that were supposed to go toward shared infrastructure and defense, and had used them to build his personal fleet and finance the Tyrol operations. It was not just a crime against humanity. It was a crime against his own people. Tanaka authorized the transmission, and within minutes, the evidence was delivered directly to the leaders of every rival clan in the Valkyrie Dominion, the Kethvar, the Dralshen, the Organthi, and half a dozen others. Each one received a detailed accounting of exactly how much Joel had stolen from them and exactly where the money had gone. The effect was immediate and devastating. Within 2 hours, the Kethvar clan issued a formal declaration of no confidence in Joel's leadership. The Dralshen went further and demanded his immediate removal from all positions of authority. 3 military commanders who had been loyal to Joel's faction for decades publicly switched their allegiance. And the Valkyrie High Council, the body that actually governed the Dominion, convened an emergency session. The order reached Admiral Torvand at the 14th hour of the standoff, and when he read it, he let out a long, slow breath that might have been relief. The Valkyrie High Council had overridden Joel's authority. The blockade was to be dissolved immediately, and all ships were to return to Dominion space. Joel himself was to be placed under investigation and stripped of his council seat, pending trial. Torvand looked at his tactical display one last time, at the single blue marker that had refused to move for 14 hours, that had stood alone against 30 warships without flinching, and he felt something he had not expected to feel toward a younger species. He opened a private channel to the Prometheus. "Captain Vasquez," he said, and his deep voice carried a weight that went beyond the words themselves. "Your species fights above its weight. I suspect it always has." There was a pause, and then Vasquez replied, "Admiral, we do not fight above our weight. This is our weight. You just never bothered to check." Torvand made a sound that his translator could not quite render, something between a laugh and a sigh, and then he gave the order. One by one, the Valkyrie warships powered down their weapons, broke formation, and turned away from Kepler 442b. They jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared into the dark, and the sky above the colony was empty again. On the planet's surface, Governor Amara Singh stepped outside and looked up at the stars. She did not know all the details of what had happened, but she knew that one ship had stood between her people and annihilation, and that was enough. She would learn the rest later. Aboard the Prometheus, the crew sat in silence for a long moment, and then someone started clapping. It spread through the ship, not cheering exactly, but the sound of people releasing a tension that had been coiled so tight inside them that they had forgotten what it felt like to breathe normally. Vasquez did not clap. She sat in her chair and closed her eyes for 3 seconds, the only rest she would allow herself. And then she opened them and said, "Set course for Ephyra Prime. We still have work to do." The aftermath unfolded over weeks, but the shape of it was clear from the first day. The Valkyrie Dominion fractured along clan lines. Draven Zal was stripped of every title, every honor, and every shred of authority he had accumulated over centuries of political maneuvering. The investigation into his crimes expanded to include not just the pirate raids, but the financial embezzlement. And the evidence was so overwhelming that even his personal allies abandoned him. He would spend the rest of his very long life in a detention facility on a cold moon at the edge of Valkyrie space, and nobody would visit him. the Tural vassal state collapsed entirely. Without Garek's leadership, and without Velkari's support, the raider fleets dissolved into scattered groups that were quickly hunted down by the very defense platforms Earth had activated in the rim sectors. Within a month, the trade routes that had been death traps for human ships were the safest corridors in the galaxy. And at Aethera Prime, something unprecedented happened. 47 species requested formal meetings with Ambassador Okonkwo. Not to renegotiate the old treaties, not to return to the way things had been, but to build something new. They wanted to know how Earth had done it, how a species that had been in space for barely a generation had built an intelligence network, a defense infrastructure, and a strategic capability that had blindsided the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. The answer Okonkwo gave was always the same, and it was always simple. "You stopped looking at us the moment you decided we did not matter," he said. "That was your mistake, not ours." The Galactic Concord, shaken to its foundations, proposed a new charter, a fundamental rewriting of the rules that had governed the galaxy for millennia. At its core was a single provision that stated no member species could be denied protection, diminished in status, or targeted for aggression based on its age, size, or perceived weakness. The provision was formally named the Okonkwo Provision, and it passed with 371 votes in favor. Okonkwo accepted the honor quietly, and when asked if Earth would rejoin the Concord under the new charter, he took a long time before answering. "We will," he said finally, "but on our terms. And we will never forget what it cost to earn a seat at this table." 6 months later, the Earth Embassy at Aethera Prime reopened. It had been rebuilt and expanded, and its walls now held artwork from every continent on Earth. Paintings and sculptures and photographs that showed the full breadth of what humanity was and what it had survived long before it ever reached the stars. Behind Ambassador Okonkwo's desk, 2 objects hung on the wall. The first was Earth's new Concord membership certificate, freshly signed under the reformed charter. The second was a small frame containing a piece of charred paper, the remains of the very first treaty Earth had ever signed with the galaxy, burned on the night of Prometheus Unbound. He kept it there as a reminder, not of anger and not of revenge, but of the simple truth that respect was never given freely. It had to be earned, and sometimes the earning of it required fire. One afternoon, Captain Vasquez visited the embassy. She was between assignments, and she had come to check on the man she had once watched walk into a room full of contempt, and walk out carrying the dignity of an entire species on his shoulders. She looked at the burned treaty on the wall, and then she looked at him. "Think they will ever laugh at us again?" she asked. Okonkwo leaned back in his chair, and considered the question with the same careful seriousness he gave to everything. He thought about the laughter in the Concord Hall, about the silence that had replaced it, about the 47 species that now sought Earth's counsel, and about the 14 hours when a single ship had held the line against an empire. "I think they will do something far more useful," he said. "They will listen." Outside the embassy window, the stars burned in the dark, the same stars that had looked down on humanity since the very beginning, when it was nothing more than a fragile species on a small blue world, reaching upward with trembling hands toward a universe that did not care whether it survived. The universe was listening now.